right, on to our unit level 3 we go. This episode will be looking at the geography, history, and religions of the Indian subcontinent. Like most civilizations, the success of a culture is based primarily on its geography. India and its ancient cultures are certainly no different. As we go forward on this journey, please make sure that you put away all distractions, including your cell phones, music devices, Xbox, whatever. Those items will only slow you down and hinder you from understanding the information. With this unit, there are no lecture worksheets that go along with it, but I do ask and expect you to be keeping notes on the materials that we talk about so that you are prepared for the test coming up next week. At the end of the lesson, if you have any questions or concerns, something you might not have completely understood, please let me know right away and we'll get them figured out for you. Now, with that all out of the way, let's get learning. So, setting the stage about the Indus region, as it's known. Historians know less about the origins and the eventual decline of ancient Indian cultures because the language of the culture has not been translated yet. In the past, I might have mentioned the Rosetta Stone. With its discovery, archaeologists were able to translate different languages because the stone had the same text in multiple languages. This allowed them to decode the previously unknown languages. Unfortunately, they don't have that when it comes to these ancient Indian scripts or writings. We have the writings, but we don't have a way of reading it. There's no translator. There's no dictionary or universal translator to help us figure out what they were writing about. We have plenty of tablets and plenty of writings, but nothing to decode what exactly it meant. All we have are artifacts of pictures and things along that nature that kind of give us a clue of what it might have been like to live during these ancient times. So let's take a look at what we got this time. We just ended talking about Egypt and its territory. Now we're going to take a little walk east, about 7,500 miles to the east into the Indian subcontinent. Looking at the region, I want you to make a few quick notices and a few quick observations. Okay. First, it's surrounded by water on all but one side. And as it happens, that one side is almost surrounded by mountains in the north, as you can see here. Think that the people that lived there probably didn't have to worry too much about invaders. Okay, they were protected by the ocean on both sides on the east and west, and the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. And to the north, they had a group of mountains. So invasion was probably not a big deal to them. Okay, now they did live there. They had to get there somehow, no doubt. But when it came to invasions and stuff, it probably didn't happen too much. So as we start out on our unit, we are going to, of course, focus on the geography like we always do. From the map, we saw a few slides ago that India is part of a larger area known as what we call the Indian subcontinent. This area is made up of modern-day countries of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and together they make up the Indian subcontinent. The region is separated by Asia as well as by several mountain ranges, some of the tallest mountain ranges in the world as it happens. These mountain ranges consist of the Hindu Kush, the Karakoram, and the Himalayas. Some of these you might have heard before. These three sets of mountains line the northernmost part of India and Pakistan. Here you can see the Hindu Kush, and the northern center is in the northernmost center part of the area, whereas the Karakoram mountain range lies just east of that. And the Himalayas are a little southeast from even that. It is the Himalayas where Mount Everest is, the highest piece of land on Earth. Interesting fact about this particular place and region of the Earth is that these mountains continue to get taller every year. The tectonic plates are actually pushing onto India, pushing India rather into Asia. Originally, India would have been more of a mountain, or sorry, an island. But as thousands and millions of years have passed, that island is pushing its way into Asia, making those mountains even taller. Just like every other civilization we've come across so far, many ancient civilizations in India were founded next to a river. In this case, the Indus River. As we've seen, along ancient civilizations have relied upon rivers in order to survive. Farming was made possible in those areas that were directly watered by the Indus River. Because much of the lower Indus Valley is occupied by the Thar Desert, there is not a lot of other places for people to have lived except next to the river. So once again, we see that the river is what allows people to survive in this harsh environment. Another of the major rivers is the Ganges River. The Ganges flows from the Himalayas and flows across northern India. Going down the river on the Ganges, it eventually joins the Brahmaputra River and flows into the Bay of Bengal to the south, which leads obviously to the Indian Ocean. Keep this river in the back of your mind because we'll be coming back to it in a bit. It has a significance to the people that once lived there as it does today. You may be able to tell that just by looking at the pictures here on the right, where people are bathing themselves in this river. So in future lectures and lessons, you'll see the significance of the Ganges River, and it even continues on today, that significance. On the map here, you can see the north and west, the Indus River flowing south after it was combined with a few other rivers. To the northeast is where you'd find the Ganges River, which flows south from the highlands of the Himalayas. As you see, it flows to the south and east into Bangladesh and eventually into the Bay of Bengal. The Ganges River is actually the final river that is made up of several smaller rivers that ended up joining together. So it's a much bigger river because of the smaller rivers that it started with prior upstream. Together, these 5 rivers that were joined make up the larger region called the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which was great for agriculture, transportation, irrigation, and all the things that a river does provide for the region. Every season, these seasonal winds called monsoons would dominate the climate of India. This can cause torrential downpours of rain, resulting in flooding. Imagine to have to put up with that on a very inconsistent basis, kind of like in Mesopotamia with its flooding. In this case, it would be wind and rain. Okay. These environmental changes were kind of a pain in the butt. Okay, sometimes they would flood, sometimes they wouldn't, sometimes they would create unpredictable changes to the environment. The list goes on, even to the point where sometimes the river, the Ganges River and some others, would actually change course. And that is obviously not a good thing if you live next to the river. Those darn monsoons would be unpredictable. Sometimes they would be wet, torrential downpours. Other times, those winds would create dry seasons that were not typical of the year before. So very unpredictable when it comes to whether it's going to be a wet season or a dry season. Let's take a quick look at the Indo-Gangetic Plain. The region between the Himalayas and the Vahanda Mountains lies in the Indo-Gangetic Plains, as you can see by the arrow. On one side, you've got the Himalayas to the north, and below that, you've got some of the other mountain ranges, not very tall mountain ranges relatively, but you do have this valley here of the Indo-Gangetic Plain. This map shows the different winds that push up into India on all sides during the monsoons. These winds would bring with it rain and wind, obviously. The wind would push the storms from the ocean into the subcontinent, causing it to get hammered with rain. And this happens unexpected times for unexpected durations of time. Sometimes they would be continuing on for days and weeks, sometimes multiple weeks, sometimes only for a couple minutes. So very unpredictable to the extent of people having to live there. Very difficult to live there sometimes. On the northwestern coast of India is where we're going to actually focus on early civilizations along the Indus. Here's what we know and where these cities actually existed. These four major cities of ancient times. So civilizations emerge on the Indus. Now we're getting into some of the history. And you thought that you knew all about history? Well, not in this case. Especially not in the case of the people that lived along the Indus. Historians, as we mentioned earlier, have yet to decipher their system of writing. It is still unclear when civilization began in these areas, but best evidence shows that people were using domesticated goats and sheep around 7000 BC. So that's about 9,000 years ago. So we have some evidence based on carbon dating and other archaeological finds that kind of place this as a very, very old civilization. The civilization that lived along the Indus Valley is sometimes called the Harrapan civilization because the first finds from archaeologists took place in an area known as the Harappa. What made this civilization unique, though, compared to others that we've discussed, is their city planning. That was certainly one of their more remarkable achievements. Instead of just plopping down buildings in any old place, like the Egyptians did, or the people in Mesopotamia, the people here actually laid out their buildings in a type of grid system, a lot like Milwaukee. They actually like city blocks, okay? And it was obviously a well-designed city. One of the benefits of using this grid system that they used was that the engineers of the city were able to create an advanced plumbing system. It was so good, their plumbing system, that it was actually rivaled that of the 1800s. So they had this system of getting waste out of their town. That obviously being a very important thing to get these human waste and animal waste out of town. The fact that some sort of specifically designed system of buildings and plumbing showed that the Indus people had a strong central government, that this was a planned city, that they had reasons for what they were doing, and that their strong government shows that people were willing and able to follow that government. This is what we're talking about when we see a grid system. From this aerial view, you can get an idea on how the structures were built, and they were kind of built in regions of squares, okay? All leaving primarily a main road down the center here, available for the transportation of goods and people and animals, as well as for their plumbing system. So a lot of these regions will see similar types of designs when it comes to the layout of their city. Square buildings, square blocks, little alleyways, but all focusing along one major central road, which is where a lot of their plumbing existed. Here we kind of see of an artist's rendition of how the plumbing system might have looked back in the day. Basically, it's a simple ditch dug throughout the town down this main corridor that would have some sort of running water, probably connected to a river, that would flush out the waste of the town. This system shows that people realized the need to remove waste from the city in order to prevent disease and other types of unwanted problems like rats and other animals, mosquitoes, things like that. If you can get the garbage and the waste out of town, it's better for everybody. Looking at the artifacts that have been found and how the city is laid out, the separation of how the houses were designed suggests that there's not much of a division when it comes to social classes. There really wasn't any social classes that we can see. The fact that they found a lot of artifacts showing that the rich people probably lived right next door to some poor people. So there's not a lot of differences between the rich and the poor. Some of those artifacts included toys, clay pots, and they suggest that the city as a whole was pretty prosperous. You're typically not going to have a lot of toys and these extra luxuries if your city can't afford it. So these luxuries prove that the city was probably pretty prosperous. Since they didn't find any real quantities of warfare items like swords and daggers, that suggests that any type of conflict was probably limited. Other artifacts discovered in the Harrapan seems to show that animals were also very important to their society, based upon the carvings and the drawings that they left on their pottery, as well as in their writings that we have seen. There is some evidence to suggest that the Harrapan did have some sort of a theocracy type of government, that their way of life was based primarily on their religion. You'll see that there are temples, religious temples that seem to be built up throughout the town. So it kind of shows that their government did have some sort of a religion, that the artifacts that they've collected show that this religion was very part to their society and their success. What I think is even more interesting, that some of the stuff that's been found from these artifacts can be linked to modern Hindu cultures. So a lot of these artifacts we see from 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 years ago are similar to the artifacts, or similar to the things that the Hindu religion uses today in its religious practices. Here are a few pieces of those artifacts that have been found. These articles depict symbols of showing the domestication of animals, as well as what could be considered possibly religious symboling as well. So, evidence found in the 1970s suggests that there's a shift from the tectonic plates that may have caused earthquakes, flooding, and other issues to have caused the Indus River to change course. After the earthquakes, some cities survived, but disaster shows that the city's food supplies were certainly affected. Later on, though, a group of people called the Aryans would eventually come in and sweep control of the area and take over. And there we have it, the end of our lecture for today on the introduction to the Indus Valley and the ancient Indian culture. As I mentioned before, if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know, and we'll get that taken care of right away. And I look forward to you checking with our next lecture, which we will talk specifically about the Hindu religion, and as well as the Buddhist faith as well. So, have a great day, and continue to be awesome. See you later.